Hello and welcome to the 98th episode of The Inner Lenses. And today, May the 12th, when this is dropping for you, is International Fibromyalgia Day, amongst other things. And I'm going to hold up my flag and say I'm one of the relatively rare guys diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I detest it. I hate it. It's chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and every day's a lottery. And you can feel like you've got full-blown flu, and it just goes on and on and on, and without necessarily having any end in sight. Unlike a virus where you think, 14 days, I'll be right as rain. It can go on for a month or 2 months or more without any respite. So stemming from that, what we're actually going to talk about is suffering. I'm one of these people who have on many occasions said suffering is a choice. But suffering in itself is very widespread. We can have mental anguish, we can have physical pain and discomfort, we can have exhaustion and fatigue that bring their own degrees of discomfort and upset. So the question is suffering really a choice? And how strong a mindset does a person need to have to be able to make this conscious decision that they are going to put that to one side? And I know all the gang have got ideas on this, so over to you.
I think the first point really is to acknowledge that there's different type of suffering, because suffering is a really, really wide subject. And of course there's real suffering. The question is, I think for all of us, what do we do with the suffering? How do we approach the suffering? What mindset will we bring along? I'm also thinking it's very easy to think here in the West of certain times of suffering. If you're born in another country, where you may be born in into certain circumstances you really don't have much chance to get out of. Again, you are suffering, but what do you do with that? So I think, yeah, suffering is a real thing, but what's the mindset we bring along with it? So I want to throw that in.
I agree. I mean, I'm also one of those that says suffering is a choice. And what I mean by that is, and it can be controversial to say that, because I know that there are people listening possibly and who will say, well, I didn't choose for this to happen to me, for me to now be in the pain that I'm in. So that's not what I mean. We're not choosing the things that happen to us. But suffering in and of itself, I feel like it is an action word. I feel like it's a verb. So there's action involved in it. And we can decide to what degree what this actually means, right? So can we just be in pain without it making us suffer? Because pain is real and pain is there, like Gabby said. I had knee surgery. I was in a shit ton of pain. Could I have been said I was suffering? Yeah, but I wasn't. I just was in fucking pain. Like, it hurt and I'm in pain and I'm in discomfort, but I knew that it was temporary. And I also knew that I could take steps to ease the pain, right? That going to physical therapy, putting ice on it, doing whatever it is that I had to do to get through the pain. So I do believe that it is a choice that we make to feel what we're feeling, but remain in it is what I think. I do think that we can decide to what degree we want this to keep us stuck. Emotional pain is probably a little harder. Sorry, Brett, I know you unmuted. Emotional pain, I think, is probably where this is harder to digest.
I was just going to piggyback on the suffering is simply making a choice. If your job is not easy and going to work every day, you're suffering. you can choose to leave that job. And then you can limit yourself and say, well, then I have nowhere else to go. But you can find another job to go to before you leave that job, or a relationship, right? There's just choices tied to some suffering, right? And what's the definition of actual suffering, right? Let's go, Erica. You're usually on top of that.
I have
right?
one right here. It is a universal human experience, often stemming from loss, illness, or injustice, with significant emotional distress and often accompanied by physical pain. And just a reminder that we know emotional pain can actually cause us physical pain. You know, dying of a broken heart, we know is a real thing. Suffering physical pain because of an emotional input is a real thing. But Brett, before we can, because we know Brett is the silent man, and we actually had to get you to, before we started, because you were going to say something about suffering being...
I was in a joking mode, like even, may the 12th be with you, right? Star Wars kind of. But then there's the rings of life, the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and the suffering, right? There's like the joking part of suffering, right? Like, and there's a choice in how we move through some of the suffering, right? We have a choice in how we go through things. So that's one thing that you don't want to forget. Is like, even though you may be suffering in emotional pain or physical pain or whatever it is, you still have a choice in how to go through it, right? But that's a different level of awareness and presence, right? And honoring. Sometimes you got to honor that suffering. There's a certain part of that, that you can honor, like missing somebody, or
This is what I mean, what I'm saying. Like, there's the pain of that, right? Loss, illness, injury, whatever. It's unavoidable. It's not. It's unavoidable. It's things that happen to us by no choice of our own. Most times, the suffering part is all up here. I firmly believe that it's up here, and how we choose to interpret that pain, what we do with that pain. And it's the resistance to the reality of what is. It's the rumination of what's going on. It's a mind game. So that's why I feel like it's a choice, because the only thing in this world that we have control over is what goes on up in here.
So we know from different schools, we're all familiar with Frankl, and the way we choose to respond is the thing that cannot be taken from us. We've probably all heard quotes from the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius and the like, anything external to me, I can remove the pain from through choice and in a moment. Gabby mentioned mindset in her initial sort of response to the question. And that's part of this, isn't it? Mindset, mental resilience, inner grit, determination, whatever you want to call it, is key, same as you've just mentioned, Erica. But where do we find that? Because it's fine to say it's a choice, but there's a whole lot of deep digging that needs to go on for that mindset to be appropriate, to make it as simple. And I know it sounds simple, but it's not easy, as our friend Gary says a lot. So how do we tackle that? Where do we even go to start?
I don't think it's like a switch you can flip on, like, okay, this happened and now, all right, I'm done suffering. It doesn't happen like that. It's a gradual thing. I think it takes intentionality in processing, in letting go, first of all, of what might have caused the pain, in reframing what it actually means to you, perhaps. This is emotional stuff I'm talking about, obviously. Like, an injury is an injury. But again, even an injury that changes things for you. I can speak personally, right? I had a I'm going to say career ending, because in my mind, I had a career on the soccer field, but I had a career ending injury of a knee that wiped me out entirely. It changed everything about my body. It changed a whole lot. So there was a whole lot of loss involved with the pain of that actual physical injury as well. So this could apply to even injuries and like health things that change everything for a person. It's an emotional process that has to go on in acknowledging what has happened and reframing the way that we're looking at what it was. But again, like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that you just suddenly wake up and say, hey, I'm not suffering anymore. Along the lines of, there are no timelines when you're grieving. There's no timeline to how long you should be suffering, right? Or how long is too long. Only you as a person individually will know that when you get tired of feeling like you can't move on to the next step in your life. It's a gradual, probably habit, maybe a habit of rethinking.
I want
The
to
first step really, oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to come and specifically ask you, because you mentioned about where we're born and the context, and we all know context of life is hugely important. But that definition, it's a universal human experience. Can we even say that suffering is universal, in the sense that what's suffering in the northwest of the globe is not the same as suffering that people have elsewhere? But go with your thought as well, Gabby.
Yeah, I was thinking when Erica spoke there that the first step is probably acceptance of the new situation. There's no way we can get out of the mindset of, oh, I'm suffering, without accepting the new situation we are in. Like Erica, when you had to accept you cannot play the soccer anymore, right? And that's a process again, because there's suffering coming in at the same time with grief over the hopes you had over it. So that's the first thing. I think the first step is acceptance of the new situation before we even can go close changing anything. Is it universal? The feelings are probably universal. When it happens, when we're in pain, might it be emotional, be it physical, that will be the same. Because we're all humans, so the human experience is the same. But I think we have to be careful when we talk about that, because depending, I mean, if you would have gone in, it pops to my mind because you talked about Viktor Frankl and I'm from Germany, but if you would have gone to people in the concentration camps in 1943 and say, well, suffering is a choice, I'm sure they would have punched you in the face. You know what I mean? We have to be careful when we talk about that, because, and I bring maybe something controversial up here now, but there's a lot of debate over it. Somebody really physically sick and they know that it's getting worse and worse and worse. There's no end to it. They're going to die in the end, but they will die really terrible with so much pain and choose to end their own life because they said, "What? I'm not getting better. I'm just going to be in pain for an extra year because with all the medication that keep me on, that's the way it's going to go." You know, big debate. No, you can't do that. Well, we're taking the choice away from people. And sometimes we have to accept that there is no end to it. Sometimes that just happens. So, do I have the right to take away the choice of people?
I think it raises a really interesting point about the individual, as opposed to the way society thinks as well. You know, to be able to consider euthanasia in a reasoned way, like you've just mentioned, is completely different to the spin that some stigma is put on. If the same person, rather than for instance in the UK, you would probably have to go either to a clinic in Switzerland. There are some moves to change the way euthanasia at the end of a life-ending illness might be tackled. But that's very different to, again, and it's contextual, perhaps someone who's born in the slums of India with a disability, some kind of loss of limbs, or even quite often physical disfiguration is still quite common in India. They're not as individualistic. They will not be thinking about, I am suffering in the same way as a kid who's being bullied at school and can't have the latest pair of trainers or the latest football strip in this country. The pain and the distress, and I wish something, going to use Erica's phrase, could be better, more, or different about this, is probably the same. But the actual circumstances and what we even consider to be suffering perhaps would alter. Would I still think and feel about fibromyalgia the way I do, and kind of detest it almost like an enemy, if I were in something as hideous and abhorrent to think about as a concentration camp? I'm sure it wouldn't help my experience of being there, but it would suddenly be a whole heap less important than the rest of the context that I was living in.
I'm going to go back to something Gabby said about the obvious first step is acceptance of situation, whatever it is, right? Health, injury, emotional pain, whatever. It's the first step in, when someone's mourning as well. So like these things are all connected, if you ask me. So it's acknowledging the reality of what is the first step, right? To processing your pain and your suffering, right? Like if suffering rests in the mind, if according to me, if it's up there, the first thing that has to happen is acknowledging the situation that brought about that pain, right? But that doesn't mean they have to like it, right? So it's like, I don't like this, but this is what has happened and this is what's happening. So now that I have acknowledged it in that way, the next logical question is, how am I responding to this now? Do I want to continue to resist it? Because I just said I don't like it, so why do I need to resist it still then, right? I can say I don't fucking like this. This blows. I don't like it. But it did happen. So now I have to respond to the fact that it did happen. And that's where the choice rests in my mind. Like that's when you get to decide, how long do I want to sit here and feel this way about this, because this is the truth of what is. Something that was, what goes on in my mind when we talk about like people that are in certain situations, right? And from an objective standpoint, it's like, wow, they're suffering in that situation. But this always comes up to me. Like, it's kind of like if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it really make a sound kind of thing, where when certain people, like if someone is born into something or is just, that's what they know, are they in fact suffering because they don't know the difference, right? So I feel like sometimes we have to have something to compare it to as well, to be able to tap into what that pain actually is, right? Does that make sense to what I'm saying?
I think it's something really important, because we often make presumptions, isn't it?
Yeah.
The only way to know if they're suffering is go and ask them.
Right. So we could look at someone who, for objectively, wow, look at that situation. Oh, they must be suffering and in so much pain. But for them, whoever that is, if that's all that they know, or if this is just what they're surrounded with and the way that it is, it's just the way that it is, right? There is nothing to compare it to. So I feel like maybe that's another key point. In order to know the pain, you have to know what was, or what something else that makes the loss of what you had so much harder.
So perhaps so that we leave the listeners with something that they can actually take as a practical steps. I know, Gabby, you sort of started with it, and Erica, you have a grief formula for it. We know that there's acceptance of the new changed reality, be that grief, trauma, injury. No injury goes into trauma. And then there's making a conscious choice about how you want to experience that. Would either of you like to give us the rest of the steps that our listeners can take? I mean,
it's acknowledge what is first. That is the first step, right? And then along with that, and aside, I hate steps, right? Because none of these things are seamless and like, okay, I'm done with that. Let's move on to that. It doesn't work like that. It's just, you got to acknowledge what is, like the reality of what is. That is the first thing that has to happen, in my opinion, in everything, the reality of what has happened. And then feel the pain along with that. Like acknowledge this fucking sucks. Like my heart is broken, or my knee doesn't work, or I just got a terminal diagnosis. Like this blows and I'm fucking pissed. I'm sad, whatever that is for you. It all works in tandem. And sit with that for a bit. Don't bypass and rush through it, because the quicker you are trying to bypass and rush through the pain that you're feeling, I think the longer the suffering might want to nag around, because it isn't resolved fully in acknowledgement. So do all of that. And then once you're fully ready to decide, I don't want to remain here, is when you start questioning your thoughts and reframing the way that you're looking at the situation and what has happened, so that you can take steps to move on. Get support, ongoing support in that, with trusted friends and counselors, therapists, whoever, coaches, whoever you have to go to help you confront your thoughts and then decide where you want to be, how you want to be feeling. It's not prescriptive or anything. I'm not writing, these are your steps. Go along and do that, because it's everybody works differently and it happens differently. But those are the things that I think have to happen. Anyone else? I mean, I'm sure I'm sitting here with great minds. There are other people that have their own. We've all been in pain, and we've all suffered to some degree in whatever that pain is. What worked for you? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm following you really. Acknowledgement, acceptance, which again doesn't mean being happy with it. Alongside acceptance, I also think comes surrender to the new way that life will be, and then addressing whatever is in front of you. For me, that can be managing pain. It can be trying to temper and balance where I expend energy, so that hopefully I don't have a massive drop and collapse. And just, I suppose, offering some compassion. The days that getting out of bed is actually a physical chore. The days when I used to come back from a multi-mile run, or hours in the gym, and my body was trembling because I'd burnt all the sugars out of the muscles, and you've probably all experienced that trembling of muscles and exhaustion. It can feel like that, and all I've done is pull back the bed covers. So just getting on and offering myself some compassion through the days that are like that, not focusing too much on, will this be 2 days, a week, a month? And this is transferable. I've had major surgeries, which you're pretty much all aware of. the same principle follows through. Acknowledge, accept, address, bounce back, find some inner grit, determination, and just keep on keeping on. Again, to quote Gary, simple, it's easy to say, but it's not necessarily easy to do.
I'm just gonna add on one thing to what I said, and because you're speaking more like physical kind of process, like when you have a physical thing. I'm speaking emotionally based stuff, even though it's overlap. But if something like a relationship or something, there is also some in that processing. It's to be able to really be honest and truthful with yourself about what has really happened, right? And own your part in it, right? Because we have a part to play in when certain things might not work out the way we want them to. So it's being able to be honest with yourself about that also. That's all I have to say.
Great, Gabby, anything?
Yeah, I'm just going to add on what you both said, and I think what always helped me is taking one day after the other. So small steps and thinking in small steps. Because suffering, I think, will continue when we also think really far into the future. Because it all looks doom and gloom and terrible and the whole thing, and we forget about the little improvements we make on a day, being it emotionally or sometimes physically, or not every day is that bad. So there are respites in between, and allowing us to actually enjoy, allowing us having the emotions of joy, especially if it's emotional pain. I think this is really important because we can go in such a spiral of everything is terrible that we can't even see beyond those emotions anymore. So if we take it more day by day, and let's say there is a great moment where we had to laugh at a joke, right? Permit yourself to have the fun. I think this is especially true in situations like grief, for example, where suffering plays a very big role. You are allowed to be happy again, even if you had a major loss. You can give yourself permission, and by living day by day, I think it becomes easier.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think people falsely sort of put themselves into almost a dead end or a cul-de-sac where they feel that they can't. You all know that humor is a massive coping mechanism for me, and I don't think I could get through some days if I wasn't prepared to laugh at absolutely everything. And there's a cider company in the West Country. It's called Legless and Smiling. So the West Country of England is famous for making cider, and there's a particularly strong cider called Scrumpy. And the guy that owns this cider press was out drinking cider, fell onto a railway, had both legs amputated, and when they found him, he was literally legless but still smiling because he was out of his face with the Scrumpy. And they made that into the name of the press. Now, if you... I know he was intoxicated, and I'm not suggesting we use intoxication to cope with anything here. But there's that sort of gallows humour in that, which I really appreciate. And I respect people, I think, more who are willing to look at life's adversities with humour, to to laugh at themselves and their circumstances as well, and in doing so, perhaps provide some lightness for others who are going through difficult times. So appreciate that one, Gabby.
Well, there's a reason why they say laughter is the best medicine, right? Because it can heal many, 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 many things. The last thing I would say is when you're in this degree of pain and suffering, it's advisable to not make any major decisions while that's happening. Allow yourself the space to just feel it and get the support you need to work through it.
Brett, any closing thoughts?
I think you guys hit it all. Yeah. I'm just listening. I'm like, man, they hit every angle, and I don't. If I'm left with no words, you guys got it.
Okay, Gabby, anything? Okay, in which case we will wrap this one. We don't say it frequently anymore, listeners, but all our details are in the comments and things below. And if this is something that you are going through and you would like to speak to any of us, then get in touch. And if not us, find somebody else to speak to, because apart from laughter, sharing, especially with your friends, is a major step in getting through trauma, grief, and any other universal human suffering. We'll see you in the next one.